Alrighty. I tried to make this video once already, but I kind of failed in it, so I'm wanting to redo it. And that's obviously with the video title talking about Solo Queue Mythic Plus. I'm going to try to break each part of what I believe or what I want to talk about Solo Queue Mythic Plus down in a couple components, and then move on to the next part to try and keep myself on track. Because last time I rambled a bit too much, and I still might. So let's see how it goes, right? First and foremost, you have to ask yourself why. Why should this exist? Why do we even need Solo Queue Mythic Plus? And to answer that correctly, I believe we need a business reason and we need a player reason. The reason why I want to talk about the potential business aspect of it is because normally things that happen in video games won't happen unless there's a reason for it financially and for the players. Um, some of those things correlate and are very similar. For example, if something's ridiculously broken to the point where it's ruining the game, obviously, from a business standpoint and from a player standpoint, those ideals align and things get fixed, right? So I want to talk about both angles of it because I feel like it makes more sense to me that way. From a business standpoint, I think the Solo Queue Mythic Plus should exist because simply it provides queuable, repeatable, relevant content for the entire player base. This is not something everybody has to interact with. This is something that a lot of people probably won't interact with. Just like we know most people who do raiding are actually LFR raiders. They just do LFR because that's what they like to do, and they call it good. They don't do mythic raiding. They're not really doing high mythic plus for their weekly boxes, right? So what this allows players to do, I think, is overcome some of the gatekeepiness for Mythic Plus, which I am just as bad at being a gatekeepy elitist piece of shit as everybody else in Mythic Plus because nobody wants to waste their time, right? One of the I'm already starting to ramble. Going back to the business sense, essentially, it will have players play the game more because they have something that's relevant that lets them play the game more. Even if you're doing rating content, even if let's say you do your heroic clear once a week, after your heroic clear, you're done. Yeah, you can make more characters or you can clear it again for no reward, but it's something that lets players just simply play the game. From a player standpoint, I think Solo Cube Mythic Plus knows something more important because it allows people to play and practice, honestly. More so than just logging in, doing their raid clear week, and logging out. And it allows for them to practice and just queue up and practice, right? When you're able to queue into something, you queue into it, you hit the accept button, you do it. Pass or fail, go again, right? One of the biggest hurdles of Mythic Plus, especially in its current format, is that I have cutting edge. I'm like 3K ish, right? If I want to get into a higher key, even a key level that's like 23s, 24s, which I have 24s done on this character, I'm not getting into those for potentially 30, 45 an hour if I even get in at all because I'm not playing a meta spec. And people want to play the meta spec because it's the easiest thing for them to do. It makes sense why they would want to do that, right? Because they want to have the easiest time. A lot of players, although don't understand why things are meta and why they're brought, obviously something like augmentation, you can see the clear value of it just by playing with it, right? But when you say, "Oh, we need a fire mage, we need a shadow priest, we need a bear tank, we need a H pal," like when you're trying to make these meta compositions, they're meta, but they're meta for a reason. You can play these same 5 characters, but you're not going to see the same value as players who actually use them for the reasons they're being picked, right? So, from a player standpoint, being able to queue as whatever class you want in Mythic Plus, whatever character, whatever class, whatever spec, allows you to just play the game in relevant content the way you want to. I have a lot of difficulty and annoyance just playing the game on all characters. Yet it shows through Raider IO. Not everybody uses Raider IO, But it shows if you have the add-on that, oh, I'm 9 out of 9, oh, I'm this rating on my main account, yada yada, right? And that can let me get into, let's say, the weekly 20, maybe. And that's if people are like, oh, he's playing it all, he doesn't know how to play it, so we're just not going to invite him. We're worried this plus 20 key is going to go down the shitter. We need an Aug Evoker for this plus 20 key. And you don't. Every single class can easily do a 20 key for your weekly box. Every single one of them. When you're talking about more difficult content, when you're looking at your 28s and 29s, by design, classes can't keep up. A lot of classes can't keep up. And that's just how it is, right? But that's what the meta is. So it should be added to the game as a TLDR of that little section, just because it allows players to queue up and play the game. Now, this does have a negative effect to it, right? The gatekeepiness of Mythic Plus also makes it seem like you're playing with a lot of better players. We saw this back when they originally released Dungeon Finder, right? Way, way back when. Something that nobody, well, some people wanted. I personally wanted it in for, like, Wrath of the Lich King Classic, because I just wanted to get my shit done, right? But you started interacting with a lot of players you have never seen, heard for, felt before. Like, basically, this system will have you interacting with worse players. It's just going to. That is certainly a negative aspect of it for a lot of people, because they're used to a certain quality of player within their within whatever Mythic Plus they're doing, and they're able to curate. It's not the right word. Curate. They're able to curate their own experience by picking and choosing who they want in their group, right? And that's what Mythic Plus allows you to do. I do not think that the original Mythic Plus system, where you can find 5 other people, and then go to the dungeon with them and get your teleports, that kind of thing. I do not think that should be removed from the game at all. That should be honestly, when you're looking at terms of doing more difficult keys, that should be the primary method. Because when you're randomly queuing into a dungeon, you're not going to have metacomps. Maybe you're going to have trouble with kicks. Maybe you're going to have trouble with stops. Maybe you're going to have trouble with this and that, right? So the randomness of solo queue Mythic Plus means that if you really want to go for that more organized experience, that's what you have the normal Mythic Plus state for. I'm going to stop my rambling and go to the next thing, right? So that's kind of how I feel about why business in a player sense of just why it should exist. Because, hey, man, it lets players log in, hit the button, play the game. For me and my alts, log in, hit the button, play the game. Now we have to talk about how it would be scored, right? How would Mythic Plus be scored in this system? It shouldn't be scored the same as Solo Shuffle. I'm not sure. Maybe they would want to do it by spec like they do Solo Shuffle. It might be annoying to some players, but if you just grind up quick enough, then if you're able to grind up quick enough, then I don't think that'll be a problem if you want to play multiple specs in this solo queue Mythic Plus environment. Because honestly, some specs are easier than others in the same class. Some are more difficult. For example, in the past couple of weeks, I have had a fucking terrible time with Disc Priest in Mythic Plus. I get a healer, I see it's a priest. Okay, cool, we might need an MD for this dungeon, get stand buff. They're a decent score. Alright, cool, whatever. They primarily play Holy. I invite them to the group, they're playing fucking Disc. And they don't know how to play Disc. So they suck ass, and it makes the key way harder, way worse, and sometimes just straight up fucking fail. Because they don't know what the fuck they're doing. So I think that's also why when you're doing this queuable content, it should be by spec. It shouldn't be just by class. Because that's more of a personal bias, but having somebody walk in and be like, hey, I'm playing this completely new fucking thing, I don't know what I'm doing, into an environment where you need to know what you're doing to be successful, it sucks for everybody. So that's why I think it should be involved. But on top of how your score should affect, because it's random, because you're not specifically picking which dungeons you're going into, I think that it should be based on the top 8 keys that you have done while queuing solo. However, it should be the top 8 keys and only the top 2 scores from any particular dungeon can count. You're not going to be able to get, let's say for this season, for example, if you only get, let's say you run a bunch of solo queue Mythic Plus and all of your best keys are underwrought because it's easy, you're not going to get a score just because you've done a bunch of decent underwroughts, right? Your score should be valued on a variety of things. So I think it should be the top 8 keys, and it should only be a max of 2 scores allowed from each key. This also should compound with the tyrannical and fortified system, because that's how they put it into the game. So you will get score based on your tyrannical keys and your fortified keys, and those scores should be counted from your top 8 within the limitation of only 2 scores from a particular dungeon from fortified and tyrannical, or tyrannical, right? They're both separate. Another thing to consider is also, apologies if you hear my washer in the background. You might. Something else to consider is item level. Just like in LFR you're able to queue into it, but you do require a bare minimum item level to do the content, right? You're not going to be able to be item level 230, Shadowlands gear, hitting level 70 from getting boosted, and going right into LFR, right? They see that as too much of a hindrance to everybody else. There's a base item level to do that kind of content. I think it should be the same for Mythic Plus keys. Your rating and your item level should determine what keys you're able to queue into. And I don't really know what item level they should lock things at, right? Because obviously you want to do better Mythic Plus to get better gear, but let's say you're doing a plus 17 and you're dropping a 428 piece of gear. Should you need 428 to get into to do that dungeon, or should you maybe only have 420 overall item level to do that? To get into 20, should you maybe need 425, something like that? I'm not sure of the exact number, but it does throw a kind of a wrench in the works when you're trying to design a system that is queuable into like this, which is just item level and simply how good players are. It is possible that if a system like this was implemented into the game, there would need to be an actual nerf to the overall difficulty of Mythic Plus, because simply sometimes players want people in 440 gear to do a dungeon that gives you 431 gear, right? Oh, you want to do 20s? You better have 440 gear, because the general player base isn't really good enough to do those dungeons without the extra help from that gear. Something that is interesting from the upcoming 10.2 patch is a enchant that you're going to get that is going to decrease, that is essentially going to be a way to nerf the raid. I think it's like a month, or it's like I think it's about like 5 weeks after the raid launches, right? You're going to be able to get this enchant that you put on your helmet that does actually pretty good damage. I did a 4-minute test of only auto attacking a target dummy, and it did over 1 million damage by itself. So it's a decent amount, right? And that will inherently nerf all content that while you have this enchant. But I do think that with this system, because of how it works currently, there might need to be an overall nerf to the scaling of Mythic Plus if they want to implement it, which I think a lot of players might not like. But the truth of the matter is, if they implement this overall scaling nerf to the system, all that means is the higher up you're going to be able to go. But there's always going to be a limit, right? There's always going to be the higher up. That's the reason why it scales. It may be annoying to get to that point depending on how much it's nerfed. Maybe it's nerfed more significantly in the 10 to 20 range, and then the 20 and up range actually receives a more significant ramp. Recently, the 20 plus range received a 10 to 8% nerf because of what happened with augmentation and how it kind of ruined the meta and ruined playing for everybody. But maybe that might need to get scaled back up in a new season where augmentation's more tuned. So to make that 20 range, so you're not like, because of the overall scaling, now you're somehow, or now you're doing 45 keys because of the overall nerf scaling because of the solo queue Mythic Plus player base being worse than the higher end player base. And that sucks, right? That sucks. And because the value of what you get, at least the weekly rewards, stops scaling at 20, I think that it is possible to nerf that section and then buff the upper limit so people aren't having to do 45 keys, that kind of shit, right? Um, and that's potentially something that needs to kind of get worked out within just the score values of the system. But speaking of rewards, which I touched in a bit too, I think the rewards now are kind of better than they have been with this new upcoming patch. Because previously, let's say you already had all of your gear at 437, you have no reason to ever set foot in anything below a 16. No reason, literally never. Unless you're helping a friend, worthless dog shit, right? No reason to do it ever. But now, with how they're changing the upgrade system, you're going to be able to change crests that you have received and then move them to a higher tier crest. So if all of your gear, let's say for this season, is 437, every single piece, and it means your item level has breached that 437 mark. What that means is if you get any of the lower crests, you're going to be able to trade them into aspects, so that no crests are considered wasted, no crests are considered worthless, and I think that's a very good change. This, as a reward system, also would benefit the solo queue Mythic Plus system, because no matter what you're doing, let's say you are higher rated, like let's say you're 2K, you're trying to play at like 5 a.m., there's nobody on, and you get put in a +8 key, right? There's no value from a +8. But what I think it should do is if you go into that +8 key and you complete it because you are overtuned for it or overvalued for it, what that will do is allow you to get double the crest from that. And man, I didn't get score, but hey, if I'm doing this for crest, if I'm doing this for upgrade material, I just got double worth. And I think that will be very, very valuable. One thing I think should be introduced as well is you should be able to queue a range of keys. Upcoming to get the Myth Track variant of gear in 10.2, you need to do at least an 18 key. So if you have gotten to the point where you're able to do 18 to 20 keys, right, and you're able to queue those keys, I think you should unlock a specific queuable section between able to queue 18 to 20 keys, or you could queue 16 to 18 keys if you're just farming that specific crest. Basically, there should be a couple, maybe it shouldn't be two, but there should be a bracket where you're able to queue for these keys, right? So you're able to do weekly vault content, that kind of stuff, without too much hassle. The only reason I brought up 18 specifically is because if you're queuing up and you just want your weekly vault, right, you can queue up, you can get your 18 key, and be done. But I think there should also be, if you're able to queue a specific range of keys, there should be a random queue that you get a reward from once a day. One of the things Final Fantasy XIV does very, very well in terms of making content or allowing other players to do whatever content they want is their dungeon queuing system. If you're doing a level like 15 dungeon, a max level player will be able to do that dungeon with you, but they get rewards as if they were max level, right? I think as a queue bonus. I think that is something that's very valuable to the overall player base as a whole. And what the reward should be, I think, is augment runes. Just the primary stat runes. You can get a little bit of gold, you can get the augment rune, maybe, and it will give you a base value of your crest. So let's say you queue and you get a +2, but with your mythic rating score, it guarantees you at least it guarantees you at least the current equivalent of 12 crests, right? Or crest fragments, how it is current. So it guarantees you that if it's a lower key, you'll get extra, or you'll be able to just turn those fragments that you get from that lower key into the fragments that you need, right? And it provides a way for players who are just starting or alts, provides everybody a way to essentially play together, um, and help lower keys, right? What's the right way to say it? I'm finding it difficult to explain. Where it's essentially just like, hey, man, players might not like doing that, and I don't know if it would work, but I think it would lead to being able to queue randomly and getting a daily reward from that would benefit the overall health of the player base as a whole. Because let's say a guy is just starting out and he's trying to do a +5 or whatever, and there's not really many people doing it. Someone queues in from the random key, helps him blast the key down, and then they're good to go, right? Um, One thing that is possible is, I think if you're randomly queuing like that, maybe they should have some form of gear sync involved, just so you're not literally randomly queuing into a +5 and walking through and killing the whole thing yourself, and nobody else gets to experience the game. So maybe some of the value in queuing that is it makes your character less powerful, to get those daily rewards. But if you don't like that, you don't have to interact with the system. You can just queue like you normally would for the brackets, right? So I think each bracket should have its own score and item level requirement to get into the bracket to try and get enough score for the next bracket. And that comes in terms with like how the queuing and the reward structure might work. Um, Sorry, I just got a lot swirling in my head trying to keep it all straight. The end of dungeon reward, I don't. I should stay the same based on the key level. For higher players who are obviously more geared, it might suck for them if they're looking for a specific piece. But if they are looking for a specific piece, like let's say you're looking for Harlequin's loaded dice from like Freehold, I think that also brings value back into the Mythic plus Keystone uh, gameplay. Not gameplay, but it brings value into the Mythic plus Keystone system where you can go, okay, I need to farm this piece of gear. I'm going to go into Freehold 18 or 17 or whatever to get a high level of this item, and I'm just going to try and queue freeholds to get this thing. So it still provides valuable content for people just doing the game generally, but then you still have that Mythic Keystone system to be able to say, hey, I'm trying to farm this specific thing at this level, and it would completely remove the ability to target queue specific things in the system, which might feed back into the player base of doing the normal versions of Keystones, right? Okay, so that's for rewards at least. I need to try to like shuffle and move on. What's the next thing I wanted to talk about with it though? Um, well, we can talk about the negatives of the system potentially, right? We can talk about the negatives. First and foremost, people might not like each other. They simply might not. It simply might be a problem. Egos can clash. It can be an issue. I think much like almost like a League of Legends like system. After 10 minutes, if 4 out of the 5 people say they're done with the dungeon, they just want to requeue a different one, there should be a surrender vote after 10 minutes of 4 out of the 5 players. That will cancel the dungeon. You go back, you're able to queue a new one, right? Because sometimes shit just doesn't work out. I think if somebody leaves the dungeon or they disconnect and they're disconnected for too long, I think if in those situations, the person leaving or disconnecting should receive a 30-minute penalty that then extends up to an hour, 2 hours, whatever, if leaving consecutive dungeons. This would, I think, work twofold for people trying to essentially fish for better comps based on score. And then it would allow. And then if that happens, the players could then leave and just re-queue. I think that's and then after 20 minutes, I think it should only require 3 out of the 5 members in case, let's say, 2 people are feuding, and then they're like, you know what, fuck all of you, we're going to keep you all in here. Because it's a solo queue system, after 20 minutes, 3 out of the 5 members should be able to vote to end the dungeon, just to get it all done. There will obviously be, especially in a system like this, where it's relevant and somewhat difficult content for a lot of players, that there will be toxicity. It's very obvious of that. Um, it is possible that if you're spam reported, maybe you just don't get to use the solo queue system. I mean, that obviously could have trouble through bots and trolls. So maybe an automated system there, especially for people who may be streaming that kind of thing. But I think the main draw of the system is its relevant queuable content that you can just go again. Uh, because how I described earlier, if it takes 40 minutes for me to get into a key, and then we fail on the first pull twice and the key is over, it takes me another 45 minutes to get into a key, and I just don't want to play anymore. So waiting 10 to 15 minutes in a queuing system to play relevant content on any character I want, I think is just better. In terms of what there are downsides, but most of the downsides realistically with this system are social. A lot of these aren't really downsides of the system or the player themselves. There may be ways to game the system, but with how crests are weekly capped, like if someone's trying to farm for crests, I think having them on a weekly cap is fine. Tipping my toes back into the reward structure, I think providing augment runes through this system is very beneficial. It should not be a tank or healer bonus queuing thing. Maybe they can give them a little extra for that if they want, but there should be a once-a-day reward of like a bag that has an augment rune and some gold in it for players that just generally want to play. I think one of the difficulties this game has had, especially for newer players, is you're a newer player and you're like, hey, how do I get gold? There's an enchant that I want for my weapon on the auction house, but it's 5,000 gold, and I don't have 5,000 gold. And people are like, oh, you can go do transmog runs, and then you can make like a couple thousand. You can make like 4,000 or 5,000 gold a week doing world quests. Like that sucks ass. And the augment runes being sellable allow newer players to get gold. It allows players who have capital to be able to use those more frequently and at less of a cost in higher end content. And having a base gold value from that lets everybody just have a little more gold. And because it's in a Mythic Plus system and format, it is something that I don't think bots will really be able to take advantage of that well. And if someone's obviously basically being a fucking robot, you should be able to kick and remove them and then have to be able to requeue, that kind of thing. So that's why I think Solo Queue Mythic Plus is a good thing. I just think it is very beneficial to many players as a whole. I would have liked to get... I mean, I've heard his opinion. Other people have probably heard. Other people like Max, Stratanos, Dorky, Growl, JB, those Mythic Plus men, like that kind of thing. They probably heard their opinions slightly through Max's streams and through little podcast segments, something like that. But hopefully in the future I'll actually be able to talk to these people about this kind of thing, because I feel somewhat limited on talking about these from just my own perspective. I try and think from other people's perspective as well, but it's very difficult to have differentiating ideas in a video like this where it's just me, right? I can try and figure things out or try and speak from another perspective, but I can only do so much because I am just me, right? So hopefully, eventually I'll be able to talk with those dudes, because I just like talking about WoW. And might be able to do something with that. Hopefully other people would like it. But before I ramble too much further, that's kind of all I really had to say. The video is definitely long, and regardless, as I tried to keep things sectioned off, I was still certainly rambling on, just because I like talking about this shit. So if you made it this far, let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. Peace.